For the love of all that is good and... Hey everyone, I'm Clayfect, and today we're going to make a gargoyle baby. I am very excited of this baby monster. Not only because I have a lot to tell you about the gargoyle in general, but also because I have my own story about the little gargoyle we're going to sculpt today. So without further ado, let's get started.
He took 100 pounds of clay, and then he said, hey listen, I'm gonna fix this world today, because I know what's missing.
Now, in order to make our little gargoyle, we are going to make a base before we are starting to play around with some wings. Now, if you have followed me for a while, you know I am not a big fan of making wings. So instead of talking about wing structure and tell you how difficult cosplay is, let's dive right into the history part of the gargoyle. A quick disclaimer though, I am not a history buff and I do not know anything about cutting stone or architecture. So please don't grab your history books to throw them at me, I'm just a go with Google. But that being said, let me tell you about the gargoyle. When people think of a gargoyle, they often think of these devilish demons, monstrous statues that are decorating buildings. But to my surprise, that was actually not the case. If a statue's only purpose is to decorate a building and looking ominous, then it's called a grotesque and not a gargoyle. So that of course led me down a rabbit hole asking, what is a gargoyle? And it actually led me to ancient architecture, believe it or not. Now, I didn't know that this was even a problem back in ancient times, but when they built all these big buildings with these thick stone walls, they apparently had a problem with water and rain. Now, I wouldn't think that it was such a big problem since the walls was made of stone, but apparently over time, it would tear into the stone, so it would not only miscolor the walls, but it would also slowly decaying the walls by washing away the mortar around the stones, apparently. So that is why they built these stone types of spouts leading away from the stone wall. The word gargoyle originated from the French word Gargoyle. I'm probably butchering that word, but doesn't sound kind of dirty though. Anyway, from what I can gather, that means float. And if you just take the word gar from gargoyle, that means swallow, or bubbling the water in your throat like what you do when you're brushing your teeth. Yeah, that's what it means. So in short, a gargoyle is actually just a water fountain stick stuck in a wall. It was all incredibly boring to me, if I have to be honest. What is interesting to me, however, and hopefully also to you, is that over time the designs of the gargoyles actually evolved, becoming more grotesque-like, and that is how they sort of emerged into this one term. They were often used on big important buildings, especially religious buildings like the Cathedral of Notre Dame. But that led me to the question, why on earth would you put such horrifying images on a religious building? And there are not many answers to that, but there are a lot of theories. One of the theories was that they functioned sort of as a scarecrow to ward off evil. Another theory was that it wasn't about warding off evil, but making the demons think that the place was already preoccupied, so to speak. Now, there are a lot of other theories and folklore stories about the gargoyles, but I'd rather tell my own story about this little gargoyle. Though not right now. Right now, I think we should get back to the sculpting. Where I'm done with the devilish wings and they are in the oven, while I'm making some nails and start working on the legs. Making this grotesque / gargoyle was quite a challenge for me, simply because as we just have learned, they are supposed to look scary. And here on my channel, I do cute. And normally those two different kind of styles doesn't go well together. But I took a lot of inspiration from the Hunchback of Notre Dame because I wanted this traditional grotesque, you can say. But I also still wanted it as a baby. I don't know if I managed to get the baby thing across, but that is a very tall order since the gargoyles is sort of ageless. Lucky for me, I have a story I think that can remedy that. So while I'm slowly building up the body and beating the body with a rock to give it some texture, why don't I tell you about our little gargoyle here, Gordan. Now many years ago, Gordan was made by a stonecutter apprentice that got the opportunity to actually make a grotesque from Notre Dame. Now, the young stonecutter was an ambitious young man that wanted to travel all around the world, making beautiful art in stone. So, our young apprentice worked night and day on Gordan. He worked so hard, in fact, that a little piece of his soul got transferred into the stone, which wouldn't be a problem. Many believe that artists and craftsmen often are doing that accidentally or to elevate their piece. But to our young stonecutter, it was definitely a problem because he was kind and had a pure soul, which didn't fit well into the demonish monstrosity he was trying to sculpt. So when Gordan was done, he was way too cute and kind looking to get the spot on Notre Dame, and instead got stuck on a small, less prestigious church. And that could have been the end of the story, where the young stonecutter cut his losses and tried again. But unfortunately for our unlucky apprentice, he had been so devoted in Gordan's creation that he had breathed life into Gordan and given him some of his own aspirations and traits. You see, Gordan was not only too kind to be a true grotesque, but he also had this deep wish and desire to fly around and see the world. Unlucky for pure-hearted Gordan and his creator that came to observe his first art piece get placed. As soon as they had mounted Gordan on the church roof, his desire to fly took over, and he spread his wings and jumped, landing right on his creator, because, as we all know, rocks can't fly. Even though it was a very graceful jump, however. Luckily, Gordan got away with a few scratches. Sadly, his creator was crushed. Literally, giving us the moral of this story: don't jump from high places unless you're absolutely sure you can fly. A lesson poor Gordan could have benefited from, but instead he decided to take flying lessons. Fortunately, the church did decide to place Gordan near the church doors, very low to the ground, so he could greet everyone. And that is where our clumsy little gargoyle spent most of his time. Now that is pretty much it of what I know about our little Gordan the gargoyle. So let's get back to the sculpting, where we are making the head. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted Gordan to be a traditional gargoyle. So that is why I gave him the gargoyle pose, the wings. So it was easy to recognize Gordan the gargoyle as just that. But when it came to the head, it was finally my time to shine. And of course I gave him red eyes to still embrace the monster aspect of Gordan. However, I did also try to make the eyes as big as possible and look like he was observing you curiously. Which I have to admit is fairly easy with these eyes, since I'm using cabochons that has a 6mm curve. That curve does make it so if I place a pupil in the middle of the eye, then it will look like the eye is looking at you no matter where you are in the room. Some people like me find it cool, but other people, like some of my friends, does find it creepy. And I do get that, in my case at least, because I have made so many figures with these type of capuchons. So when you go into my studio/office, there is a lot of eyes following you, I have to give them that. But I'm getting sidetracked again, aren't I? Now let's refocus back to the sculpting, where I give our little Gordan some horns and detail them before I give him some ears. Now ignore the ears because they are only temporary, I'm going to redo them anyway. Let's instead jump to the detailed work, where I really had a chance to make this gargoyle my own. And you get a chance to see just how much Disney's design of gargoyles has affected me. But I will still say it has a personal touch. I also gave him some cracks here and there, not only to make him look more interesting, but also because Gordan did accidentally jump and land on his creator, which is bound to give some cracks, I would imagine. And by the way, I know I didn't mention it in the story, but Gordan feels super bad about the crushing his creator thingy. It really did a number on Gordan's self-esteem for a while. But, you know, life goes on. Well, not for the young stonecutter, but for everyone else, life goes on. And Gordan eventually forgave himself with some therapy from a pigeon, who coincidentally also is his fly instructor. Now there's an idea to a Disney movie they haven't made yet. Speaking of haven't made yet, as you saw with his head now detailed, I worked on the arms and the hands, finishing up this gargoyle pose. And with his arms about to be done, all we need is to beat up his arms some more with the stone before we give him some cracks. Now, while I'm doing that, this might be a good time to mention that liking, commenting and subscribing is definitely a possibility if you like what I'm doing. And thanks to all my Clayfects who have already done so. Now, for some unknown reason, Gordan's last bake wasn't as successful as I would have hoped. But I didn't like the ears anyway, so that is why I'm taking them off and giving him some bigger, more bendy ears in cosplay. And I have to say, I do like these ears a lot more. I think he gets so much more character and do look a bit younger with them. And with our more successful extra trip to the oven, Gordan was finally done and we could get to paint him. I started by giving a dark grey speed paint all over our little Gordan, so it could seep into all the crevices, really bringing the stone texture I had trying to make through. Now, throughout this painting process, I was debating with myself how much of this rock texture I should let shine through. Simply because Gordan is a rock statue, but then again he had been sanded down and polished, I would imagine. So it was quite difficult to know the level of rock, so to speak, that should be there. That is why I kept going back and forth with some dark washes and some light grey dry brushes here and there. To make the rockiness of Gordan a bit more realistic, I did tickle some spots that were exposed here and there with some white. And I have to say I really loved that effect. Not only because of the contrast that really helped with the details on the wings, but also because it lightened Gordan up a bit, making him less ominous and more cute, and therefore also completing the challenge I had given myself. But with the last effect of paint on, all he needed was a little bit of cleanup around the eyes with some isopropyl alcohol. And I think that is it for this sculpture and it for this video! Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed little Gordan and his story. The story was in fact a mix between my own idea on Gordan's personality and what happened to him and Mr. Clayfect's idea. and I just think it fits very, very well with this little guy. Even though this sculpture is sort of simple, I have to say I am a big fan of this one. But alas guys, unfortunately it is time for me to sign off. I hope to see you next time, but if you can't wait until next time, why not click on the square to your right? Then you will see me battling with 8 legs while I make Odin's horse Sleipnir as a foal. But until then, as we would say here in Denmark, hold da munter!